So Truss is well and truly gone, but of course the search for the successor is indeed on. And with names such as Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, and even, dare we say it, Boris Johnson being potentially brought back, it's anyone's guess as to this time next week who will indeed be the new Prime Minister. But one thing is absolutely for certain. Whoever gets in, there is going to be absolute chaos still in the Tory party. They have become absolutely ungovernable. And if you've been following my channel for any length of time, I have been telling you day in and day out for years on my Good Morning Walk that, look, the chaos is there. The gaps, the chasms, the ideological splits and differences are just too big to bridge. And Boris Johnson was just the wallpaper that was covering those gaps. And even he was coming to the end of that sort of wallpaper credibility because there were already Tory MPs going, Boris isn't a conservative, or Boris isn't Brexity enough. So make no mistake, these factions within factions that now exist within the party of the Conservative Party are going to cause trouble and be at it constantly. Even if Boris Johnson gets back in, he is no longer, I think, capable of being that wallpaper role. In fact, I don't think there is a single Conservative who is able to do so. That's why I said the search for a unity candidate they were so desperately searching for just ended in vain. But today we look at what, shall we say, the European media has had to say about this, well, Westminster wibble, so to say, and Truss's eventual fallout. And yeah, I'm a big proponent of sometimes you've just got to look abroad to see what other people are saying about your country to get a bigger picture and certainly a better one. And it's not just the media that have had takes on sort of the downfall of Liz Truss, but also leaders from abroad as well. So before we get into some of their comments, what they had to say, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. And of course, down below, there is the YouTube thank you button. And of course, the YouTube Pony Club as well, which you can join, where you get badges, emojis, and whatnot when we go and do live streams and stuff. And you also get, remember, you get a free live super chat a month as well when you sign up. So, on with the show. And this one comes today to us from The Guardian, who have very kindly gathered all of the EU media and leaders together into one story, just to show you the reaction that has been from Europe about this. So, again, as we said, this comes from The Guardian with the title of EU media and leaders blame Brexit for the UK political insanity as Truss quits. And one other thing I want to point out is there has been, even in the UK media, an actual admission that Brexit might actually be to blame for all this. And I'm very much on that bandwagon that, yes, Brexit is to blame for all this. You can clearly pin from the referendum to the downfall of Liz Truss, for the Conservative Party. But anyway, let's get into it. So, 6 years on from the Brexit referendum, the continental observers have become used to the Westminster meltdowns, and many see it as the latest cataclysm, the inevitable final of a project that was always divorced from reality. What have we always said for years? When Brexit meets reality, reality always wins. So, listened to, perhaps understood, not really, said Lamode on Liz Truss on the news of her resignation. A terrible orator who could do little more than repeat growth, growth, growth. Seemingly impervious to criticism, she was rejected by both the public and her own party. So a very, very scathingly and very accurate source from Lamode there. However, of course, what did Emmanuel Macron have to say? Political leaders have also politely expressed their regrets. Arriving at an EU summit in Brussels, Emmanuel Macron said that it was important that Britain rediscovered its political stability very quickly. And in the context of the Ukraine and describing the UK as a friend, the French Prime Minister added that he was, quote, always sad to lose a colleague. Well, there you go. Oh, and Ireland's Taoiseach, Michael Martin, expressed personal sympathy for Truss, although I wouldn't, to be honest, give her too much sympathy, declaring what he described as, quote, a very difficult time for the Prime Minister, although he too pointed a finger at Brexit, saying this, that issues have flowed from that decision, and since that decision was taken, Martin said, many have not been even thought through in the respect of what was essentially a political decision with huge economic and market implications. And of course, the Russia has obviously got to get their boot in, because obviously they've got to. Russia's foreign ministry was even less generous, saying that Britain had, quote, never known such a disgrace as a prime minister. And the foreign ministry spokesperson, Miriam Zakharova, said that Truss would be remembered for her, quote, catastrophic illiteracy. Can't deny that, but, there you go. The continental media had even few doubts about the cause of the prime minister's woes. For Liberation, there was a, quote, delicately something rancid in the Tories' tea. And Sonia Dessel, the sulphur, said that the British government and the Conservative Party seemed, quote, on a path of total self-destruction. And that path certainly seems to continue today. Among the most other European commenters, the paper's former London correspondent identified one core problem. In 4 months, the country will have had 4 chancellors, 2 interior ministers, and soon 2 prime ministers, she observed. After a succession of implausible scenes in Parliament at number 10, who will Liz Truss's actual successor be? That's the real big question, because Brexit and its chief architect, Boris Johnson, have drained the Conservative Party of all substance and consequence. That's exactly where that's very true. And it was, remember, it was Boris Johnson who very much started this whole procession of complete incompetence taking power. When he came to power, instead of choosing good people, he chose complete and utter incompetence. They were nowhere to be seen. They all either went to the backbenches and just have stayed very silent for the past couple of years, or Boris Johnson kicked them out because most of them were very much pro-Europeans. So Boris gave them the boot and purged them from the party. But they haven't sort of left the party. They've been outside the party. And I've often wondered whether they would become a serious adjutant within the Conservative Party. But again, they've also remained very, very silent during this time. And instead, what he has done is, rather than pick anyone with any shred of talent, he picked the most talentless loyalists he could pick. Why? Because he was terrified that if he was to pick someone who was actually competent, that they would overshadow him very, very quickly. He did not want anyone who would challenge him. We even saw, if you remember back far during the pandemic, we heard the rumors that he wanted to try and find a way to get rid of Rishi Sunak. Why? Because he didn't like the fact that Rishi Sunak was overshadowing him, that he had all this popularity, that at one point he was more popular than Boris. So Boris wanted to try and find a way of getting rid of him. That is not how you run a government. That is not how it should be done. And even then, there were Tories who knew this, who knew full well about this, that all this was going on, that the people in cabinet were completely talentless, and they let it happen. And it still rumbles on. So, back to this. Lamode also saw the decision to leave the EU as its ultimate origin of the current UK crisis, saying that since the referendum, British governments have demonstrated with ever greater talent that Brexit only takes the UK further away from the promised land of recovered sovereignty and untrammeled freedom, wrote Cyril Khan. Take back control, they said, but the British are a very long way from doing that. No other EU member is in such a state, and since Brexit, Britain's conservative leaders have worked tirelessly to prove that EU membership was very far from the problem. Anil Terrat, the London correspondent of the German public broadcaster ADR, was another who trained her sights unerringly on the decision to leave. Truss was, quote, now the third Conservative leader after Theresa May and Boris Johnson to fail to deliver on the Brexit promises, she noted. When we look at the future, what future historians would find as the roots of British politics' current insanity in 2016, Derrett said, it was firstly because Brexit has damaged the UK economy so lastingly that any market uncertainty leads to far more greater turbulence than ever before. Secondly, because Brexit and the inherent magical thinking of sovereignty and the UK can just go its own way in a globalized 21st century world was detached from the international developments, marked the beginning of the end of rational thinking on the island. Truss's dramatic failure, Dirt concluded, would now spell the end of that wishful thinking and the beginning of something of a British turning point. Dizit also argued that Truss's political demise could be the key moment of the extreme ideological project of the neoliberal group within the Conservative Party has failed, perhaps even heralding one of the most important turning points in the country since the Brexit vote in 2016, he said. And, it just continues. It just continues like this. Italy. Where was it? There it was. In Italy, to whose, again, habitual political chaos, the economics this week compared to the UK's, Correio del Sella concluded that however, quote, this saga ended, Britain's credibility had collapsed. Luigi Il Tibalto, I think that's how you say it, wrote that the debacle, compared by some commentators to the Suez Crisis and had ended Britain's imperial ambitions, has, quote, unmasked the post-Brexit illusion of being totally sovereign nation that can just ignore international realities. No one is an island anymore. And will this insanity continue? Very likely. I don't think this will continue for much longer. You've got to get rid of the Tories, and they've got to go off into a corner and sort themselves out. It's very clear what they have to do. They have to start purging the party of these complete and utter incompetence. And if you can't get rid of them, then they have to be able, or at least smart Tories, or at least grow a spine in some cases and start saying, you are not prime minister material. You should never be allowed to be prime minister, because both Boris Johnson and Liz Truss had virtually no experience in this job. Now, yes, they were obviously senior cabinet roles. One was, foreign secretary at one point. The other, again, foreign secretary and even international trade. So they did have, quote, some experience, but this by no means qualified them to become prime minister. And unless the Tories seriously start to weed the wheat from the chaff, this will happen again and again. So the only way out of this really is a general election. And I think that might what they have to do. Whoever wins is going to have to go for a general election. And then they're going to have to go in the corner and they're going to have to sort themselves out. Because the only people who can save the Tory party is themselves. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.